Unfortunately, I forgot to click record when I was painting the first side. However, what I did is I created a gradient going from red to yellow, whereas I'm kind of doing the same thing on the right side now. I'm doing a gradient from blue to red to yellow. And then instead of just letting it dry like I did on the left side, I'm actually going to take a clean brush and now smush it on top of the blue, then over into the red, and then this kind of creates that cloudy texture. You can kind of see some purple mixing through, and then I'm actually just fading that down, that little color mixture that was created while doing that, and then I'm creating like fluffy little clouds towards the bottom, making it look like it's going back into space. So creating these nice and tiny compared to the top ones that are like smushing it more, so I'm using less pressure for these tiny ones. And I could also use some water like I just did to help fade it out so it's not as dark or saturated like our original one. So then this one's more watered down and lighter, like it's going back into space. Then I create my horizon line. I did the same thing on the left side, but what I'm doing is I'm painting left to right. I'm creating that texture to make it look like water by creating lines. If it gets too wet, again, you can use a paper towel to lighten it. I'm trying to leave some areas more white with less color in it to show the highlight, the water reflection, whereas some areas are a little bit darker and more lines overlapping. The best way to do this is to build up your values gradually. So adding those layers, add some lines in, let it dry, and then go back in and add more. Again, right there it got too dark, so I'm going over it a couple times to fade it down, because I don't want it to be as saturated just yet, because all these different values overlapping kind of creates that depth that we're looking for in our water. Continue this process, adding those layers, gradually building up your values, making sure that it's lighter first and slowly getting darker as you work your way forward. You'll notice though that it will get to a point where it is too wet and you can't really work at it anymore until you let it dry a little. So I'm getting to that point right now, so I end up going back to my original one and I go in with red to help darken some of my lines. As you build these values up darker, don't forget to also leave some areas lighter to show that water reflection. You'll notice that my painting on the left, you can see my sun peeking through. In front of where that sun is peeking through, so directly below it, that's where you want to show majority of your highlights. Keep in mind as you're painting, as you're adding all of these layers, that you're using each of the colors in your color scheme. So for the one on my left, I am using only warm colors, but I am using a cool accent. So as I'm building up my values right now, I'm continuing just to use red and yellow. Where they overlap, they are creating different values of orange. But as I work my way up, I will eventually add red violet in as well to create more shadows, which again creates more depth. Another way to create clouds that differs from the one that we did on the right is to again still smush your brush. I'm using red so it stands against my yellow background, and then I'm feathering it down to have softer edges towards the bottom. I also wanted to show the highlight of the sun, so the bottom of our clouds are more yellow, whereas the top is that red value to create that sense of depth. Eventually I will also go in with red violet and I will feather that into my shadows. Here you can see me using a wash of red over my background to create more depth in my painting, and then leaving the yellow of the background to show the highlights coming from the sun. I fade this around my sun so that my sun pops out more to show a nice contrast between the background and my sun, and then I also fade down to my horizon line so it's more of a smooth blend. Next, you can see me now going in with my red violet to darken the shadows in my clouds. Again, it's towards the top, which is farther away from our light source, which is the sun. And then it's also creating that nice contrast between our layers, showing the yellow highlight in our clouds, and then the red violet is the shadow going back into the sky. Continue adding these layers until you like how your clouds look, until they're the achieved darkness that you would like your painting to be. This one I wanted to have more darker values throughout, whereas the one on the right I did want it to be more subtle with softer values. So it's up to you how you want to achieve this. Now that I'm happy with the one on the left for now, I'm going to let that one dry and see how it turns out. So I'm going to go over to my painting on the right and begin to add more layers now that my water is dry. So I'm going in with some more saturated blue, again swiping my brush left to right to create that water texture, leaving areas of the canvas unpainted to show the highlights peeking through, and then some areas that have more paint to show even darker value. I also take some of that darker value to add at the clouds towards the top, just so it looks like it's getting darker the farther away from our horizon line, because that's where our sun is, where our brightest values are. Now that my left side was dry, I did want it to go a little bit darker, so again I'm going in with my red-violet mixture to push those values back, leaving some places more open to show some lighter values, and then overlapping others to create more depth in my water. Continue this process until you're happy with how your sunset watercolor scene looks. Lastly, we will take off our tape and then add our notes in the margins. So here you can see me writing that my color scheme for the right was a triadic one, using my primary colors for this one, which are red, blue, and yellow. I'm labeling that for my background, I created a color gradation from blue to red to yellow. And then I explained how we lifted color by smooshing our brush to create that cloud texture in the background, which I also drew an arrow to show different aspects where this was used. Next, I also explained how I swiped my brush left to right to create that water reflection texture. And then I also explained how I left gaps lighter to create that highlight and the water reflection. Don't forget to date and sign your name at the bottom, and then leave whatever notes that will help you remember what you did. Hope you enjoyed this process, and I look forward to seeing how your watercolor landscapes turned out.